Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. I hope everyone is doing well today. We wanted to focus on reflecting, and that reflecting should be on the whole issue of hidden factors which disrupt our relationships, which a lot of times we don't bring into awareness. They're not hidden in and of themselves, like as a matter of the unseen, but they fall out of consciousness, or they fall out of the purview or the boundaries of our attention. And so what ends up happening is that sometimes we miscalculate how we understand things in our relationships due to the fact that we are not looking at what's going on in the relationship in a more holistic way. Relationships,
watch out, vehicle on shoulder ahead.
They carry a number of different things. They carry ideas, they carry emotions, past experiences, right? Stresses. They carry a number of different things. What's interesting, I once was studying a book that was written last century, 20th century, and it was written in like the 70s. And one of the benefits that I gained from that book was that it was beginning to deal with the issue of divorce as a consequence of what was going on in the 60s. And it made me reflect upon what I saw growing up in the 80s. And so one of the things that the author had brought up was the social changes that were taking place began to have an impact on the way that people understood themselves and their relationships. And so there was a carryover. And that was a time period which is very interesting, specifically within the context of the US reality, and even globally to a great extent. It was an interesting time period because divorce was not something that was dominant. Divorce was something that was still not significant enough to consider it to be a major social problem. But it was a social problem because it was impacting so many people. And so that type of analysis of looking at what's going on in our environment and looking at what's going on within ourselves and our thinking and so on and so forth. And more specifically in our emotions and our wishes and desires and our fears, the irrational side. You know, the irrational side to what's going on. And even things such as boredom. That began to shape my analysis of how I began to understand things, and it helped me tremendously to be able to penetrate and gain insight into people, especially within the context of marital discord. So those things are kind of obvious issues that go on in the society, stresses, pressures. But I think now that we take it for granted that economic pressures are a very real impediment. They have a negative impact on relationships. We take it for granted and we try to ignore it as a reality. Because of the demands of economy, people expect you know, that if the money piece is not there, well, the relationship has to come to an end. And you have some communities which do worse than other communities in that regard. Economics is a big factor, but we know that. But what is not really looked at in this case of economics is how it is that we understand the role of economics in our marriage or in our relationship. And that sometimes we take it for granted. We're not really talking about that, you know what I'm saying, in a way that will allow us to navigate through that. And the reason why I say that is because economics is one of the primary reasons why people fall out in their relationships. And they don't realize that underlying that reality is the reality of stress. Is it the economics, or is it the effects of the economics not being in a certain place? Which one is it? You understand what I'm saying? And so if you look at the effects of the economics not being in a certain place, you know, then you have to ask yourself, if we were to remove the effects, the negative effects of having economic challenges, would we still want to be in that relationship? That changes. If we frame the situation like that, it changes the dynamics of how we look at the relationship. So economics is an issue, but is it the economics in and of itself, or is it the fact that I need support and I don't have it, so it becomes a problem? Right? I need somebody to cooperate with me as a partner. I can't carry the weight alone, and because I don't have that, it creates a deficiency. Is it the fact that, you know, I'm looking for a certain degree of motivation to be there so that I can have confidence in that things will get better because there's an effort being made? You know, is that what is bothering me? You know, see, a lot of times we don't look at those issues from other perspectives. Like, someone may not be motivated because they may be depressed. And that brings us to the second issue, which is more of what I wanted to talk about, which is something that is a hidden reality for many of us. And that is that we're living with mental health issues in our relationships. But because of the way that we navigate in this society, even with the attempt to remove the stigma from of mental health or from mental health, we still, in the popular culture, we have a lot of negative things to say about people. Even we say, well, he's bipolar, or she's a narcissist, or, you know, we have all these psychological labels. You know, that person is slow. You know, we have a number of different psychological labels that we put on people. You know, he's a psychopath. And we throw around these terms that are... Sorry about that. I went through a blank spot. No signal. And I forgot my sunglasses, which I needed them. But in any event, back to the point. Mental health issues in a relationship. It's very taxing on people, especially when you don't know how to deal with the situation as it unfolds on a daily basis with someone that's unpredictable. You know, and without, you know, understanding that reality, is going to be difficult to see if that relationship's going to last. The other issue that comes into play is that there has to be a willingness to address that issue. When people are in denial that there's mental health issues that are in the marriage, whether a person is suffering it and is in denial, or whether a person is putting up with it, so to speak. I don't like to use the word putting up with it, but, you know, it's just a simple way to differentiate who's who. But more respectfully, a person that is living with someone with mental health, right? That's a more respectful way of dealing with the situation, and more appropriate, to be honest with you. A person that's living with a partner that has mental health, you know, when you don't admit that that is what's going on, that's a problem. When a person is suffering mental health on a personal level, when you don't admit that there's something that is going on, that's a problem. Because what comes out of that reality, that dynamic of having to live with a mental health issue, is that there's a lot of behaviors that occur in the relationship. Say, for instance, if someone is suffering anxiety, that person can wake up with anxiety and worry about a number of different issues from the morning to the night. And so anything can be an issue, from where the toothbrush is at to why was it this particular bill paid on this particular time, and why did you say this in that way? But underlying the issue is anxiety. And so underlying all of those issues are anxiety, or is anxiety, sorry. So the issue that comes up is that a person is not understanding where the behaviors are coming from. Right? And so when we don't admit that there's something up, that we need help, a lot of times we're in relationships that are carrying that reality, and we don't even pay attention to it and how much it has an impact. How much it has an impact. The other issue that's similar to mental health is past trauma, and how it is that everybody doesn't have trauma. You understand what I'm saying? Trauma is basically, people going through bad experiences, and those experiences are disruptive to their ability to live normal lives. Normal lives meaning undisrupted. That thing is not stopping you from doing things, right, that you need to do. But when people have trauma, they develop all kinds of other issues. If someone can be in a bad car accident and they will have a fear of highways, right? Or someone could have suffered rape and they would have a fear of physical intimacy. You understand what I'm saying? Not everyone responds to traumatic or potentially traumatic events in the same way. That's something that needs to be understood. The other issue that comes up, aside from the issue of trauma and how it is that it can continuously impact the relationship, whether it comes from the father, a relationship with the child, or whether it comes from the mother, or whether it comes from some other traumatic incident like a sibling or a relative or a friend or whatever. The situation which occurs at the end of the day is that we have to be aware that these things are not really something that we're used to dealing with. And lastly, I want to say, sorry, I got distracted between driving and people sending me messages. Lastly, I wanted to say that addiction of all sorts, addiction to drugs, addiction to sex, addiction to food, addiction to spending, addiction to the internet, the telephone, addiction to attention. A lot of times these are issues that go unnoticed. Or they're noticed but not really noticed. It's like, they're not really identified. And so it's like these things pull at our relationships in different ways. Right? And I wanted to add to one point before leaving. And that's the point of developing ourselves as humans. That's extremely important. It's like if we're not developing ourselves, the life of an uncluttered mind, and being in touch with what's going on with our thinking and how our perception can be detrimental. It could have negative impact on us. If we're not aware of the life of the mind, of emotional intelligence as well, our thinking, how it can cause damage. If we're not aware of how it is that our feelings, and our emotion, how we have to have an understanding of how to deal with our own emotions, that's a big issue. That's a big issue. We need to have emotional and intellectual maturity. And that doesn't come by thinking that it's already got it and that's it. We have to grow. And then there's the spiritual reality, which underlies that, of understanding how it is that sound spirituality helps us to discipline the mind and discipline emotions, and that's important to have an understanding of. Why? Because I had mentioned before boredom. Boredom is a big issue. When people lack a sense of meaning in their lives, this creates fitna in the relationship, and a lot of that comes from a sense of emptiness. And so if your spiritual life, is not being cultivated, is not being groomed, is not being developed, of course, you're going to have issues with that. And that's going to take you to the issue of you thinking that the other person in the relationship is there to make you happy. And so when that person doesn't entertain your happiness, then all of a sudden you're ready to leave because you're not happy. He doesn't make me happy. And you never question yourself. That's not to say that we shouldn't create an environment of happiness for each other. But if you think that someone is there solely to make you happy and that's it, and when your happiness is not there, then there's a problem in the relationship. You should stop and pause to reflect. Firstly, is the problem really with you? Is it because of lack of spiritual development and lack of knowing how to deal with the emotions and lack of meaning in your life? Or is it actually the case that the relationship itself is immature? In other words, you have to dig deeper. There's a lot to be said on this, but this reflection was just meant to get us to begin to think about things that may impact our relationships that go unnoticed. Assalamu alaikum.